I've actually been a health and wellness coach for probably about 20 years, coaching pro athletes and a lot of different like weight loss clients. And I've just found that so much of our image and the way we view ourselves really helps us to be successful, or can really hold us back with a lot of resistances. And so I started this path of going into more of the yoga. And I've earned my 300-hour yoga certification. And from there, started to go into something called Ayurveda, which is a lot to do with nutrition. And I just kind of found this huge disconnect between a lot of my elite athletes and Ayurveda medicine. And so, but I still felt like there was something more out there. So I signed up for Layla Martin's Vita Institute, which is a 650-hour, very intense 2-year program, and went through the program for Tantra. And I guess when I signed up for it, this is kind of funny, I didn't realize it was to become a sex, love, and relationship coach. I actually thought it was just to learn about Tantra and how to incorporate it into my own lifestyle. And went through the program and then started doing some of the clinicals with outside clientele. And I was using some of my athletes, and a lot of them just really blossomed because as they were healing a lot of their trauma and becoming more aware of their bodies semantically, that they really just were able to expand their successes when they competed, or when they were trying to meet certain weight goals, or being in the gym and just being more empowered. And so I thought, well, I'll just open this up to outside clients. And now I'm running basically 2 different types of coaching. I do a lot of health and wellness for people, but then I also have my Tantra clientele. And it's been a beautiful integration of the two, because say I get a female client, totally hypothetical, but say I get a female client comes to me and she says, hey, I have been struggling to lose this body fat for years. I can't stay motivated. And the first thing I'll do is a Tantra session with her, which we talk about resistances. What is inside of you? Not so much about what the story is that you're telling yourself, but why are you resisting this success? And it usually comes down to something that's happened in their childhood, or a relationship, or somewhere along the line, they've really hit like a hiccup or a roadblock in their life. And being able to identify what that roadblock is changes their whole thought paradigm in how they treat their bodies, how they treat their sexuality. They're just more empowered just overall. And so I love that I was able to integrate these 2 modalities together, because it really does connect mind, body, and spirit.
This is why I was excited to interview you. Okay. First of all, thank you for sharing all of that. You explained everything so clearly and so well. I want to start back at the beginning for people who are listening and they're like, wait a minute, what is Tantra?
Mostly Tantra is about bringing the unconscious to the conscious. It's about finding things inside of your body that are preventing you from living your best life. And one of the ways I also like to describe it is kind of what it's not. With Buddhism, for example, there's something called the middle path, which is where you have happiness, sadness. Middle path says we go in the middle and we try to keep that steady witness consciousness and not being one extreme to the next. Tantra is about the total opposite of that. It's about taking our happiness and how can we bring it up? How can we make it more expansive? And then also, how can we find pleasure within our sadness also? So it's like we're not trying to fight emotions where we're constantly at these wars and battles within ourselves. It's more about being able to witness those experiences, and then how do we bring them back to our daily life to bring more pleasure and empowerment and sex magic and connection with other humans and authenticity. It's like, how do we bring all of those together?
You said sex magic. Okay. So some people who are listening might not know much about Tantra, but what they do know is, wait, I thought Tantra was all about sex. It's related to the Kama Sutra. Tell me how Tantra is related to our sexualities. How does it play into that?
So there's something called chi, which is kind of a more of a Tao principle, but it's very tantric also. And that being able to move energy through the body, up through the genitals, all the way through your seven chakras, all the way to the third eye to reach enlightenment. And so when you're able to, like I said earlier about roadblocks, so if you can take sexual energy starting from the genitals and bringing it up through the body, you're going to start hitting roadblocks. Is there something in your throat that's holding you, that you're not saying, that's holding you back? So now your energy is stuck. And so then being able to figure out, what is that? What is that coming from? Is there something that you need to heal as far as a relationship goes? And then, or is there something you need to say to somebody that you've been holding your tongue? And so being able to release that, now that sexual energy is coming up through the body, and not just sexual energy, but energy just from a body standpoint. And so then being able to break through all of those roadblocks. Or is there something in your heart space? Say that you need some healing around a relationship that went bad. And so once you heal that, you're able to move that energy through the body. Well, imagine being able to do that in your daily life. And say you're driving down the road and you can find pleasure in the trees and the flowers and the sounds of the cars and the music playing. And if you have those blockages within your body, you're not going to really be able to fully experience life at what it has to offer you. And so that is what Tantra is about.
You used a really key word, which is finding, it's pleasure.
Yes.
And you said finding the pleasure in everyday things, in even the blockages, in even the pain. Why is pleasure so healing? So just to give a little background, we are from Live Jasmin, and we have seen firsthand that pleasure seems to be very healing for people.
Well, it comes down to science and how our bodies are wired, and that we have our sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system. And so if we are in a high stress environment situation, we're going to have that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. All of those are cortisol level. Your cortisol levels are going to skyrocket. All of your metabolic rate's going to slow down. You're not going to produce as much serotonin, dopamine. Those are all good, feel good hormones, because your body is prioritizing overcoming that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And so when we can use pleasure and sexuality in a way that it kind of gets rid of or heals that stress response, now we can stay in a rest and restore, which allows our body just to, from a like biochemistry standpoint, allows us to feel more safety and more connection, not just connection with other people, but connection within ourselves. Pleasure can be very safe. Now, I will say, if you've had some type of sexual trauma, some Tantra workers will use kink or BDSM as a healing modality for sexual trauma, because what you're doing is you're almost reenacting that stress response, but you're handing over the power to the victim. So now the victim is not the one that's disempowered. They are empowered. So it allows them to heal that PTSD response, allows them to heal that cortisol response. And now they feel empowered, and then they can experience pleasure in moments in time that they were never able to before. So it's not just about pleasure as a metaphysical woo-woo, it's also the science of it too. And that's how our bodies operate. And so if you can, and it's also about finding, when I say pleasure, it's not just about finding pleasure sexually, it's about finding pleasure in everyday life. So one of the practices that I do with a lot of clients is something called a 5 senses reality. I'm going to blindfold you and play you the most beautiful song that you've never heard in your entire life. And you're going to totally find pleasure in that, embody it, and let it flow through your whole being. I'm going to give you a cotton candy grape or a piece of dark chocolate or a raspberry, and I'm going to make you eat it so slow, and I'm going to have you try to find pleasure in that. And then being able to smell, like here's some essential oils, try not to identify them, but find pleasure in the different smells. What do they feel like? What do they make your body feel like? And so we go through all 5 of the senses. Well, what that teaches somebody is then when they're outside of our practice room, now they're able to find pleasure when they're doing the dishes and they can feel the water in their hands, or they're hugging a child and they can find comfort in their skin, or they're drinking a cup of hot tea and just being able to melt into that. There's an old Buddhist saying that enlightenment is making tea really well. And so you're just putting your whole effort and your whole being into what you're doing daily. And I have found that being able to stay with that 5 senses reality allows you to stay in the present moment a lot better too. And so just when I say pleasure, it's not about just pleasure sexually, it's pleasure in all aspects of life.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, because I'm sure that that's helpful for people listening. It's almost like that reminder, oh yeah, life is supposed to be pleasurable. And I can find pleasure in the mundane. I can find pleasure in eating a grape, and just taking your time with it, or listening to a song. Because so many of us, especially in this modern day and age, where it's go, 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 hustle, 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 everything is moving a million miles a minute. We don't take the time to, I mean, I can't speak for the world, right? But many of us don't take the time to really be present and enjoy that song or that dish or holding someone's hand or whatever it is.
Well, and then that transfers over into your lovemaking too, when you're with your partners, because now instead of, maybe going into pornography or going into trauma or how does my body look right now? Instead, it allows a person to say, what do the sheets feel like under my body? What does my lover's skin feel like? What does their hair feel like? What does their skin smell like? And it allows them to stay out of story and more in the present moment during sexual endeavors too.
When we are in fight or flight and our nervous systems have developed from years of being chased by wild animals, we don't really live in that world anymore, but that's still what our nervous systems think, that when we get these cortisol rushes, we're super stressed out. Our body is thinking, okay, there's something chasing me. I'm in survival mode. I have to shut everything else down and I have to focus on surviving. And at that time, you can't heal. You're right. Like, I think that's why pleasure is so healing, because it can take you so deeply into the present moment, which, like you said, allows your whole system to feel safe. And when you're relaxed and safe, then the body will start fixing what it needs to fix. But it can't do that when it thinks that it's being chased by a lion, It has to focus on surviving.
Yes, because you're prioritizing survival, because ultimately that's what we need to do, is we need to survive. Tantra is also about equipping people, not just in that 5 senses reality, but also we do a lot of breath work. So being able to slow the breath down, and even I often use Wim Hof breathing techniques, which is very fast and fiery, and holding your breath for long periods of time to really increase your adaptation. And so that is a big part of Tantra, and also sounding, which a lot of us, it always kills me the first time I get a new client and I'm like, okay, I want you to just yell. And they're like, what? And we just don't have, we're taught to be so constrained and follow certain social norms, and being able to move silly, being able to move like water or move like fire, like to the music that I'm playing with them, or being able to yell or at the top of their lungs, or just laugh, really wholeheartedly laugh at absolutely nothing. Those are very tantric practices, and people just don't do those things on a daily basis. Like, we just don't do that as a society. I mean, if you were at a restaurant and just let out this huge sigh, everybody's gonna look at you like, what's wrong with her? But if you're at a tantra community and you let out a sigh like that, everybody's gonna be like, thumbs up, I hear you sounding, because that's huge for us.
Right, right. Yeah. I'm curious, do you have, obviously not giving any names or too specific details, but do you have a story maybe with an athlete or someone who was struggling with something and you brought in these tantric practices and you saw the improvement in their life or a deep shift that you could discuss?
Actually, one in particular, she has struggled with eating disorders for several years. And we started out with a meal plan and workout plan. And she would start out really well for 5 or 6 days. And then she would just completely sabotage herself, going into the kitchen and grazing at night, overeating, waking up in the middle of the night, going and eating more, keeping chocolate at her desk, those sort of things. And so she was just eating. And so she would do that for 3 or 4 days. And then she would call me, hey, I messed up. Can we start over? And we did this 3 or 4 times. And I said, look, you don't need help with the meal plan. Obviously, something else is going on. And so we did a typical Tantra session. The way that I like to structure them is always start out with a 10-minute mindfulness meditation.
So this was one of your health and wellness clients.
Yes.
Not a tantric client. This was
Correct.
You create the meal and exercise plan for, but you saw that she kept reverting back to old ways with the meal plan. So that told you, okay, there's some other issue. And then you decided to give her a tantric session and see how that goes.
Correct. And so this is what a typical session would look like. So we start out with a mindfulness to bring into the present moment, allow you to get rid of the traffic and all of those things, and kids and work. And then we do a couple of gratitudes just to elevate our level of energy. And then I ask them a few questions. And this comes from Layla Martin's desire system of basically, what do you want? What do you want? And going deeper and deeper. And so at first, a lot of times people will say, I want to be thinner. Well, okay, what do you really want? And eventually we get down to, I want to love myself. I want to have total radical self-fucking love. And so once we uncover that, now their need is different than me just giving a meal plan to them. It's, what do you need to heal to be able to take care of yourself and love yourself? And so for this particular person, she had actually had an affair. And so early on in her marriage, and she was carrying around a lot of guilt about it. And she was not able to, she thought that she was not worthy of looking a certain way, and she was not worthy of feeling radical self-love. So we healed a lot of that and allowed her to forgive herself using Tantra practices through breath work, question meditation. We do some archetypal work too. So identifying the inner child and identifying power sources, such as maybe like a witch or a goddess that lives within inside of you, and giving that power over to that person inside of you, and then being able to channel that power to something else. So once we figured out that she really, what she needed was radical self-love, we figured out what that resistance was, that roadblock, like I talked about earlier. Now we can heal that. And now she can go into a state of radical self-love where she can take care of herself and make healthier decisions. And then, so after we do that part of the practice, I always give homework. And that can be, sometimes it's finding an empowering truth and masturbating to that truth. So for example, say I have radical self-love. I will send them home and I say, hey, get out your favorite dildo and masturbate, because you are now have a safe place to do that. And the more you say to yourself, I have radical self-love, I am radical love, and you masturbate, you're channeling that pleasure. And like you said earlier about the safety, you're allowing that safety to move in the body. That new empowering truth is a new program inside your mind, inside your heart. And so now if there's some goal that you're willing to, that you're wanting to establish to meet, then you have another way of doing it besides just beating your head against the kitchen door, trying to not eat. So that's it works also with people with addiction, because oftentimes addiction, like alcohol, sex abuse, pornography, they oftentimes will have some type of roadblock too, that has nothing to do with the addiction. It's something that they need to heal. And we find that, locate it using Tantra principles, and then we incorporate that new empowering truth into their lives.
It's really interesting because as you were talking and you gave this exercise, which I know it sounds radical and a lot of people are going to be like, what? But when you were talking about it, I was thinking, society uses that sexual energy to program us with so many things, and it is so powerful. That's why it's used. We sell everything with sexual energy. We sell burgers with sex. You know
Yes.
what I mean? Like, we sell food with sex. We sell everything with sex because it's so powerful. And we're not really like taught that it's powerful on both sides of the spectrum. It can be used to disempower you and get you to be like just a consumer for whoever's using this power, right? Or you can use that power yourself and reprogram yourself. You use the word program, which I like, because at the end of the day, I think that's what this all is. We've already been programmed and maybe we don't like that program, so we need to switch it with a different one or whatever the case is. That is really interesting. And I think it just shows the power of our sexual energy. And if there's one thing, I mean, there's many things that I personally would love people to take out of these interviews. One of them being is that sexual energy is powerful.
Mm.
And we see it all the time at Live Jasmin. Like I said, I'll interview a member who's been seeing the same model for 15 years. They have a bond that most relationships don't last, most friendships don't last 15 years. Like, it's far and few between. But in this world, it's actually quite often that, at least from my experience interviewing hundreds of members and models, they form like years long relationships. Again, this intimate, vulnerable sexual energy is very powerful, and it can be used in probably an infinite number of ways. So that's the first thing I wanted to say about what you said and noting that practice. But the second thing I want to ask you to touch on for people who are listening that don't know much about Tantra, how old is Tantra? Where does it originate from?
It's so you had mentioned the Kama Sutra earlier. So Hinduism has a lot of different truths, and the Kama Sutra is one of many. So the sexual side of Tantra is only about 10%. The rest of it is actually a religious practice where you're trying to get enlightenment or become one with your source through sexuality, pleasure, meditation, breath work. So it's what we know of it. A lot of it is from the Western culture, not the Eastern. And Western culture is that it's more highly sexualized. And so whereas Eastern culture, it was more of a branch off of Hinduism. And so they were considered kind of the radicals because they would do some magic work with things like menstrual blood and saliva and semen. And so some of that got kind of radical, but for the most part, Tantra has been around forever. And, yoga came out of Tantra because what would happen is the soldiers, the warriors would go out to fight, and then they would come back like an athlete, be totally beat up, and they couldn't sit to meditate. And so tantrikas, or what's called dakinis, would teach them how to move their bodies in asanas, like the yoga practice of movement. And they would teach them how to move so that they could loosen their joints and actually sit and do meditation and find God. So it has a huge history behind it. And there's different divisions of Tantra also. For the more of the Western side, one of the things that people may hear is different colors of Tantra practices. So there's white, pink, red, or black. So if you ever see something that says it's a white Tantra practice, that typically means there's no touch. It's a very spiritually based coming into source experience. And then pink would be a little bit of touch and a little bit of breath work, a little bit of just a little kind of taste tester. Red is a little bit more sexual. And then black tends to be more of the kink and BDSM world. So if anybody ever sees something that pops up and it says pink puja, and you're going to be invited to this great party and you think, oh my gosh, this is going to be a sex party. It's not. If it says pink or white, you're good to go. Unless you're really super adventurous and you want to try the red, more power to you. But so the practices in the Western world, it kind of depends on who your coach is, your teacher, your tantrika, what type of practices they're going to do.
And that's kind of what I wanted to establish, because in the Western world, I think there might be people listening that are like, oh my goodness, people that are into Tantra, this new craze, right? But it's thousands of years old.
Yes, it's been around very, very, very long time. There's some records that indicate Hinduism is over 25,000 years old. I mean, there's a lot of historical strife against how old it is. Some say it's only 5,000 years old. Some say it's only 2,500 years old. Some say it's 25,000. And so because of that, a lot of the oral history of Hinduism has been kind of off to the side. And so we don't have a clear, accurate picture of when either Hindu and Tantra came into being. Now, I have brought up Hinduism, but you can practice Tantra as a non-religious part. It doesn't necessarily mean just because they are connected, because one came out of the other, it doesn't mean you cannot practice Tantra and say be Jewish or Judaism or Christian. It just means that Tantra is kind of like Buddhism in that you can adopt the practices without adopting the religious side of it.
Absolutely. I mean, even yoga is also that way. You can do yoga and not practice Hinduism, but it does stem from that line of religion.
Yes.
It does come from Hinduism. But exactly, that you can still use these very beneficial practices. Yoga is also thousands of years old. Tantra is thousands of years old. And I just say that to establish the fact that even though that it may have become trendy in the last like 20 years or so in the West, it's not new.
I'm actually working on my PhD in clinical sexology right now through the Modern Sex Therapy Institute. And so, but one of the things that can happen is something called transference, where say you and I have a working relationship together and I'm the therapist and you're the patient, where I will have certain emotions come up or even maybe certain turn-ons come up, and I will transfer over to you as part of your treatment. If you don't have somebody that is very strong in their own practice as a Tantra coach, there can be a lot of transference. So that is one of the things that you have to really be aware of, that there is that connection, but there's also a certain separation at the same time. Because when you are dealing with people's emotions, their sexuality, and their trauma, and some of it is somatic, some of it is hands-on, you have to make sure that there's boundaries discussed. If you get a Tantra person that just says, oh, let's do a lingam massage, which is kind of a glorified hand job. If that really, I mean, that's great if that's what you want. But if you're really looking at taking your practices and your sexual health and your healing and your spiritual health to a whole new level, you're not going to want to just jump in with somebody that's going to offer that. You want to sit down and talk and have conversations and build a practice up. One of the other things I wanted to bring up too is that one of the very first Tantra practitioners that I worked with would do all these really shadowy work, very dark healing practices, and then would send me on my way. And I would always kind of leave with this just kind of empty feeling somewhere inside of me. Well, another Tantra practitioner took me under his wing, and he explained to me that when you take something out of your body energetically, you have to replace it with something else. You cannot let a client walk out the door after doing a whole bunch of trauma work and expect them to walk out and be a functioning person in society. The way he explained it is that that's why I do the empowering truth, is because if I'm going to take something off of you energetically or physically or emotionally, when I send you out the door, we need to have you equipped with something new. And so that's one of the reasons I do the empowering truths. And those empowering truths can be as small as I am powerful, I am love, I am strong, I am a leader. any of those things are going to be empowering truths that they can remind themselves daily of that, so that whenever they do start to kind of sink back into that downslide of into their PTSD with those brain cycles, they can go back to the empowering truth. And what that does too, from a body standpoint, somatically, is that if they were feeling a certain way in their body when we created that empowering truth, now when they go out to society with their families, they're at their jobs, and they say that empowering truth to themselves, it's going to actually reignite that feeling somatically in their body, so that they can go experience that in other places. So having the right teacher is super, super important.
Why is female sexuality so healing? Why is it so powerful?
Well, I think part of it is with when you can receive sexual power from a female, you have to feel worthy of it first. And so if you can hold on to that feeling of worthiness, like you're ready to receive from a woman, I think that's part of it. And when a woman gives you so much love, not love like a marriage love, a different kind of universal love, when a woman can give you that type of motherly, witchy, kind of powerful love, you're able to let go. You're really able to let go of your shame, of any kind of self-limiting stories that you have around the way your body looks, around how your peers see you. You're really able to kind of just let all of that go and receive. And I think women just have a huge ability to do that. Whenever a woman is a very feminine place, it allows her man to come from a very masculine place. And there's a book, I have to throw this is like one of my favorite books out there, is The Way of the Superior Man. And one of the things that he talks about is that finding purpose, and men, masculine body people, really have to have a clear definition of what their purpose is in life. And I think that when women start to work with men from their female, I think it allows men to really figure out what their purpose is, because I think it complements that masculine to feminine energy. And the more feminine power, the more masculine power. The two of them really complement each other. Going back to Hinduism, I mean, look at Shiva and Shakti. He was in a place of bliss and wouldn't come out of it. So what do? They send this beautiful woman out there to say, hey, wake up, we got a world to run. And he said, oh, I'm awake because you're beautiful. And so you've always got that complementary ebb and flow, moon and sun, the energy. It's how God created us, is to have that exchange.
When that feminine energy, like you said, is directing her focus on the masculine is really built up by that. And we see that principle on Live Jasmin. I've interviewed members who have told me that in the past, they would never approach a woman that they were interested in ever, at a bar, at a party, whatever it was, because they were too shy. But then they started having these positive experiences with these models, these gorgeous models on Live Jasmin. And now all of a sudden, the member tells me, I feel confident enough to approach women at a bar now. I'll ask for their number. And, my boss told me that I've been performing better at work. And again, it just shows, because he had these repeated positive experiences from a woman that he was receptive to. And it built up his self-esteem so strongly that there were noticeable changes in his life. And
well,
yeah.
And in another book, The Rational Male, I mean, he even describes that when women tend to belittle men, it makes them not masculine anymore, and then women don't respect them. And so it's this huge cycle of, yes, you know what I'm talking about. It's so, whereas if a woman can respect her man and allow him to live his purpose and allow him to have his masculine friends and have hobbies and support him, instead of nitpicking and It's just, he's going to treat her better, and there's going to be a lot more respect going back and forth between the two. So I think it's a very powerful woman who can support a man in his masculinity, because there are women that don't like to do that. And so that's one of the things that Tantra works with too. If I do couples therapy, is being able to identify where each of the couple is coming from to be able to improve their connection and their communication.
I'm curious, you work with couples. Do you ever, and individuals, do you ever work with people who are involved in some form of adult content creation or sex work?
Actually, yes. So one of my best friends is a very popular brazers. So I train her and I work with her a little bit on her emotional health. And then I also just started recently writing for Habit magazine. And it's a hot wife magazine. So they've asked me to write articles on polyamory, jealousy, envy, how to overcome some of those emotions, the difference between swinging and polyamory, and how to transfer into those lifestyles without so many hiccups along the way. So yeah, so I did start writing for them recently too.
What are your thoughts on, let's just use camming because that's where we're from. What are your thoughts on camming?
Oh, I think it's amazing. I think that connection you have with your clientele is so needed. I think it serves a purpose for people that are busy lifestyles. They want that connection. They want some form of intimacy. I think it's amazing. And I would, as a practitioner, I would prefer a client be live with a woman or man rather than watching passive pornography. Just because the way the body processes porn, I would rather see that human interaction.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's actually why people, because obviously a lot of the criticism to platforms like Live Jasmine are, it's just porn, it's just sexual porn. But when you realize that people are paying by the minute for this interaction, and there's free sexual content online for free, you don't have to pay anything. You realize that it is about the interaction that people
Well,
actually.
and I have to vet my clients, especially because men will contact me from my website and they're like, oh, let's get it on. I'm like, no, this is not what this is about. And so if we can't have some form of connection verbally in a first session where we can talk, and then we won't even talk about sexuality yet. Like, I want to know what your intentions are and what are we doing? What are we healing? What are your desires? What are your goals? And so I think that when you can just pull up pornography, that's just masturbation. And granted, I think pornography is awesome as a form of entertainment or occasional indulgence, but I think the human interaction is so much more important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because again, you're able to get connection, which is, if we want to go back to our nervous systems, it's always going to, in general, be healing to have connection with another human being, because that's how we were developed. It's still in our DNA. That has not evolved out yet. You know what I mean? Like, we still need each other. And there are people who have done studies, even when it's cam to cam, you still mirror each other. There's still a communication between limbic systems and matching and mirroring, which sends the message to your brain and your whole system. You're in connection. You're safe. Connection always means safety for a human being because we survive in groups.
Well, and I think COVID kind of, I think it made it more acceptable for us to be able to have conversations on Zoom and other platforms. And I think it's a little, because even when I first started doing Zooms with clients, or when I was doing my clinicals for the Vita Institute, I was scared. Like I had a lot, I was like, oh, I can't do this. I'm not gonna be able to talk to somebody online. And fast forward a couple of years, now I feel perfectly comfortable with it and I can have that conversation. And Layla would tell us that it is possible to have an energy exchange through and I thought, there is no way. But now after doing it for a while, I can definitely agree there is an energy exchange. You can read people's emotions through their eyes, their facial expressions, their tone of voice. And so I think I think it's a beautiful platform. I personally believe that every single human being has source connection, and we are a collective consciousness. And so I believe that if I help heal somebody's wounds, physically, mentally, emotionally, that not only heals them, that heals you, and that heals me, and that heals the person over there. So I believe that there's a huge connection between them. And pleasure and the genitals just tends to be just a method of getting there, to finding that spirituality.
Is there anything about your work, Tantra, human sexuality, that we didn't talk about, but you want to share?
Oh, I honestly, I think I covered everything. Thank
Good.
you. You asked some great questions, so thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, my final question to you then would be, what do you think are our collective or individual next steps in moving forward to create a more sexually well society?
I think practices, such as five senses reality, having a meditation practice daily is huge. Having a sexual health and hygiene, being masturbating on occasion, or having partners or some type of pleasure activity, even if it's not sexual, but finding pleasure in touch and smell and taste. But also, um, there's something that couples can do called yab yum, where they sit and face each other and they do eye gazing. And it does not have to be sexual. But I will say, when I started this practice with just first with my partner, and then expanding it to other partners, and even sometimes with my clients if we're close, eye gazing is so big as far as like how you connect with people. And if you can just sit with your legs entwined, your heart space fairly close together, and you can just look into somebody's eyes for 3 to 10 minutes and just really take them in and enjoy them, you're really able to step out of the human experience and become more of a source experience. And you can really see what God intended for us when He created us and our connections. And so I think eye gazing is beautiful, and that would be one practice that I would suggest.
And we have examples of how receptive human beings are to eye contact in general. There are studies that have shown if you break eye contact, people tend to trust you less. Like, people feel close with that eye contact. I think, and we know, I'm sure you've seen this in clients, people who may have an aversion to intimacy tend to feel a little bit uncomfortable with eye contact because it is so intimate and so telling, you know? What is it about the eyes?
Oh, they say it's the window to the soul, to the pineal gland. And if you read literature from like British literature or Old English literature, a lot of that is about, you'll see monks and things that talk about, she gave me the eye, or she looked at me. The eyes, like if you made contact with a man and you were a woman, you made eye contact, that usually meant something very sexual. And so making that connection, it's been around for thousands and thousands of years.
I've loved this interview. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.